few seconds. And yes, I believe that it's safe now. So Dark Bleatings, everyone, welcome to, oh, I froze for a second there. Welcome to, well, no, let me start again and I'll just edit this bit out. Dark Bleatings, everyone. Welcome to another author interview. I'm here today with Benjamin Langley, just in time for Guy Fawkes Day, Bonfire Night, because we'll be talking about the Guy Fawkes Demon Hunter series. So hello, Ben, welcome.
Hello, how you doing?
Pretty good. I have to say, this is obviously just like framing and devices we're using, but you look so tiny on my screen. It's so funny.
Yeah.
You look like a miniature version of yourself. Oh, I'm just going to pretend that that's actually the size that you are. There you go.
We've got a high-tech kind of prop here with a wheeled stool with the camera on it, with the phone on it, so I can go backwards or forwards really easily.
Very high-tech. I'm balanced on a printer, so
yeah,
we've got all the
things we have to do.
So I'm a big fan of Ben's Guy Fawkes series. For the uninitiated, it's sort of a historical horror fiction trilogy about Guy Fawkes. Would you like to tell us a bit more about it, Ben?
Yeah, sure. So the 3 books span Guy Fawkes' entire life. So it starts from the moment he's born, and well, I think everyone knows the end of Guy Fawkes' story. So the first book takes us through his time as a child in York until he's about 16. So I described that one as a coming of age alternative history, demon infested horror as such. And then the second one is kind of his kind of post 16 up until about 24 or so, where he kind of moves away from York for the first time, sees a bit more of the world, gets more involved in kind of the politics of the UK at the time. And the third book starts in Spain with his time there and stretches through to the kind of gunpowder plot, but it reimagines a lot of the history, a lot of the anti-Catholicism with kind of demonology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really, so I have genres that I tend to like avoid because I just assume that I won't be interested, and any sort of historical fiction I've never ever picked up, but you've completely changed my mind about it because I just didn't realize. I think it's because I'm not that interested. This probably says quite a lot about me that I'm not very interested in history. Probably because I was made to do it in school, and the history lesson, our history in school was absolutely rubbish and not interesting. So I think I just had like this bias. But then, obviously, I think I read your first Guy Fawkes one when you won the Indie Author Feature Week.
Yeah.
Is that what? Yeah, that's when we read it, right?
Before it came out. Yeah. So a while ago now, but
yeah, it was a couple years ago, and I really enjoyed it, and I kept forgetting that I knew how Guy's story ends in real life as you go along, because obviously you've infused it with so much fiction and fun. What made you pick Guy Fawkes?
I don't really know where the initial idea came from or where it started. It's one of those things that was kind of always there in the back of my mind somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd written the first 3 novels and the first novella, which were all kind of locally set stories, pretty much modern day. And then I just thought, well, what do I want to do next? Something slightly different. And I don't know why I stumbled upon kind of that element of history, but it was just, the idea was just there. And then the more I looked into it, the more interesting it became, with the way kind of the history of all of the conflict at the time just seemed to work in my head. So I had started reading more and more into history and thought that I first of all thought it would be just one book. And I thought I'll just start writing. But I got to about 25,000 words and realized that it was going to be massive. And I had to kind of take a step back and plot it some more. But I didn't realize just how big it was going to be. But yeah, each of the books is kind of pushing 100,000 words.
Yeah, they're for books like that's not like enormous for a novel, but a bit longer than the average novel each. And sorry, I'm okay now. Yeah, and but they're real page turners because the I don't know. I guess did you plot these, or did you? I know you would have had to have done some plotting when you realised it was going to be a trilogy, but did you like plan out the book, or do you sort of pants it and then edit later?
With this one, I did have to plot it a lot more than I have done in the past, especially because the first book would have been released before I even started work on writing the third book properly. So I kind of had to make sure that anything I wanted to seed in the early books was in there. So I did have to plot this a lot more tightly, and I'd kind of got all of these touchstones through kind of history that I wanted to hit, and with his life. So I knew where each book had to get to, and I think that way they do kind of tell kind of a self-contained story as well as part of the history. But yeah, it was a lot more plotting needed than necessary, and then I wanted the story to dictate kind of what elements of history I kind of used and which ones I ignored. But sometimes there were things that came up which were just too interesting to leave out. Like in the first book, the story of Margaret Clitheroe and her horrible death is all real.
Oh, I
Apart
didn't
from
know that.
yeah, she was a real person. Now sainted. But and you can go to along the Shambles in York. You can actually walk into what was her butcher shop, and it's now kind of a shrine to her. And when I stumbled upon that and just how horrible her death was, I kind of made her part of the story, and she grew into quite a big part of that. So yeah, sometimes history dictated the story, and then I kind of had to plot those bits in and kind of pull them out more.
Yeah, you used like, as I say, I'm not great with history, so a lot of what I know about Guy Fawkes I learned from your books and Googling to see like were those bits real. Very disappointed to find out there's no real world evidence of the demons, but I assume that, you have sources, so I'm just going to go ahead and pretend. Um, so much to talk about with these books. I'm trying to think where to start. Let's start with the structure. I'm a little bit of a structure nerd, thanks to like my focus in uni and everything. And where I thought you did really, really well, which is why I think this is partly why they're such page turners, but also it's the characters and the events and stuff. But you sort of adhered to like a 3-act kind of structure. But what really worked for me is that the 3 books, like, it works as a 3-act structure as a whole with the 3 books. So they each contain their own acts, but then overall they make up 3 as well. So I thought that was really well done, because I don't read a lot of series, because sometimes it's quite evident that on the first book the author didn't know they were going to do a series. Like, as you say, you got you like so like you seeded things in, and sometimes you can tell that there wasn't much of a roadmap, and that's where I tend to lose interest. But these were all linear, obviously, because we're following Guy's life. Yeah, and I did keep like I said, I did keep forgetting that this is based on a real guy. So even though I know how the story's going to end ultimately, I kept forgetting it and then remembering and going, oh no. One of my favorite things about it is the framing device that you used as well at the start and end of each book, which obviously it becomes really apparent why you've done that in the third one, and we will give no spoilers. But I really loved how that came about. So for people who haven't read any of these yet, we start in modern day with 2 characters, and one of them is telling the other one about Guy Fawkes, and then we get Guy Fawkes' story in this. So I was so excited for the third book to find out why you done that.
Yeah, I think first of all, it started off as a reason to tell this story. Why would anyone be talking about Guy Fawkes and his tale now? So I felt I needed something to introduce that. And this idea of an old man running towards a bonfire to try to pull out an effigy of Guy Fawkes because he was so sickened by the idea of destroying what he considered a hero seemed like something which would make somebody want to know his story. But then when I finished the first book, I then kind of wrote the rest of the framing device that went with that. I kind of had an idea of where it's going to go, but my publisher was like, well, how does this fit in? Why is this happening? So I'll write all of that now. So I had that straight in my head. And I think a lot of the themes that kind of are part of that, a lot of the kind of the politics in that was relevant to that time as well. So there's a good kind of crossover with them. But then you've got kind of like interesting things like the real places that you can still go to, because Guy Fawkes is still so well known. So the pub that he visits at the end of the second book and the start of the third is a real place. You can still go there. The Guy Fawkes Arms in Scotland. So I went kind of along there to have a look at it and think, well, could this work? And yeah, it would. So yeah.
Yeah, the places were really captured so well, like all the locations, and I think being British, I have a general sense of what things look like in Britain, you know, and but I think that you painted it really well for people who this would be completely alien to, who've never visited you. And oh, very quickly, in case anyone doesn't know who Guy Fawkes is, he was the guy that some time ago made an attempt to blow up Parliament, a failed attempt to blow up Parliament. And what's really funny to me is, this is like ties into your stories as well, is that when I was a kid and we celebrated Bonfire Night, I didn't know the whole history of Guy Fawkes, right? But my understanding was that Guy Fawkes was a hero. And I don't know if that's because I come from, I'm not saying it's ever justified to blow up people for any reason. I am against that. But when I was a kid, I don't know if this is because I come from a really low income working class poor area, and there is quite a lot of political unrest. People are not very happy with the government and how things are done, and you know, distribution of public funds and things like that. And even when the Labour government were in charge back then, you know, there was still a lot of that. So my feeling that I just got from the area I live in was that we were celebrating the day that Guy Fawkes tried to blow up Parliament rather than that the attempt failed. And it always, when I got a bit older and I realized, oh wait, no, it's supposed to mark the day that that plan didn't pass and everything. But the fact that we celebrate this with fireworks, like the irony of that to me, I'm like, well, I don't know. And I think that in Britain, I think a lot of people kind of view it that way as well. I'm sure there'll be people who disagree with me, but Guy Fawkes isn't really like a hated historical figure, I wouldn't say. Is this just me showing up my...
No, I totally get what you mean. Yeah, and I mean, if you look at things like V for Vendetta and the character that's created in that with the Guy Fawkes mask, I don't want to say celebrates, but it kind of explores the idea of rebellion and why we would rebel against a government, against something that isn't working. It was something that did make writing that last part quite difficult, because any way you look at it, mass murder is wrong. So how do you do that? So I've got kind of lots of Guy Fawkes' own doubts that go in there. And if you look into the history, well, the fact that somebody wrote a letter to warn somebody shows that they all did have doubts about this and whether they should do it. And yeah, so it's a weird kind of moment in history where this character is so well known, kind of notorious, but not vilified perhaps in the way that the event should be.
Yeah, well, I saw V for Vendetta in the cinema and people cheered at the end. I've never, you know, we're in the UK, and you know, when you see these videos of people going nuts in the cinema, that's usually American audiences. In Britain, people tend to just like silently like, oh, I loved it. So that's the first time I was ever in a cinema where there was like an eruption of people loving what they were seeing, and I thought, wow. And I was a teenager then. I was like, yeah, no, I don't think it was just me as a kid with the Guy Fawkes thing. I think people wanted, like, people want to see the world burn. Well, not the world, but like the people that are making our world burn, you know? And so I really loved, like, the further, this is so hard to talk about without giving any spoilers, and I don't want to spoil anything about these books because I really recommend them, and I really hope everyone picks them up. They're a particularly good seasonal read. They're all good. They're good all year round, but especially if you're looking for something in November, these are great books to read. But Guy Fawkes is a demon hunter in these books, and especially in the third one, that sort of analogy for how people are viewing our political system I thought it was really effective. So when you were plotting then, I know that you were sewing things in, but did you definitively have your end when you were writing the first book?
Yes, largely.
Yeah.
I think because of how his story ends, you've kind of got that moment, but there had to be something else, otherwise it's ultimately hopeless.
Mhm.
So I kind of had to put something else in there, which does go back to an item which Guy Fawkes receives in the first book,
Mhm.
which
Oh
is
yeah, yeah.
actually real as well. The things that he receives from his grandmother in the first book, um, a whistle is one of them. That's real. That was really in the that was really what was left by his grandmother. And I thought, well, how could that work in this world? And then using the character of his sister was kind of an interesting way to kind of play out that ending and suggest that there was some hope in what is otherwise ultimately not a good ending for that character.
I was so excited when I saw these items coming back because obviously between books I'd kind of forgotten about some things. So I love it when authors do that. When you like, I was like, oh yes, and yeah, I was so excited. The so how did you decide what kind of personality to give Guy and the people around him? Because the I haven't read a lot of fantasy, but I read a little bit of Terry Pratchett, and the first book, um, I was getting shades of some characters from Discworld in that. Like I could believe that these were real people, not as ridiculous as Terry Pratchett. I'm not saying that you went full Rincewind with any of
Yeah.
these people, but they're all believable. But there are shades of like, oh, that's right on the edge in terms of floating skull ghosts and things. You know, so when you were deciding how to present Guy, what were you thinking about with that, considering that he was real?
I think I had the advantage of starting with him as a child, so I
Mhm.
could kind of shape him in my own way from the events that he experienced. So I think you can play on that naivety in the first book as he's going through this. When you are a child, you just accept what is in front of you and you just go with it. So if you've grown up with that all along, then that's part of your reality. So the fact that he sees this kind of spirit, this skull floating in front of him, that's always there for him. So and they form this relationship where he both trusts it but gets frustrated with it, and he kind of can't resist doing what it says. He always ends up following this. So there's this inevitability that he's going to have to do it, and a frustration that
Mm.
this path is laid out in front of him. So I think because I could follow him for all of that time, it enabled me to shape him in that way. And
Mhm.
the characters around him too, a lot of them, there's just very scant details that you can build a whole character from. It's the advantage of going that far back in history with characters who weren't nobles. We
Mhm.
only know about them from kind of birth records and kind of some family history. So you can build all sorts of things in, like the character Thomas Percy, not the floating skull Thomas Percy, the other Thomas Percy. That's another thing about history. You're bound by names,
Mhm.
but just the fact that there was an old rebel called Thomas Percy, and then a Thomas Percy who Guy Fawkes knew was just too good to resist. But yeah, various things about the fact that he married one of um, the siblings of some of the other conspirators, but that didn't last.
Mhm.
That kind of allowed me to set him up as a bit of a cad in some ways. So yeah, so you could use those little elements of history, and then there was so much room to do as you pleased with the rest of it, which I enjoyed.
It was really it was just really enjoyable, and I noticed this is another thing I think you did really well. So the first book I found really funny, and I don't want anyone to like misunderstand, but like I'm not saying like everything is really frivolous, but the characters and the way that people are responding to things that are nuts, it's really funny and relatable, and it felt quite light. And then the next book, it was the same, but you like get to very deeply care about a lot of these characters, even more so than you did in the first book. But there are like darker shades in the tone of that one. And then the third one I thought was a lot darker tonally, but it didn't lose all of like what was set up in the other books or anything. But I just felt like there was this sort of like more serious progression heading towards the end. And I was really nervous reading the last book because I knew how it would ultimately end for Guy, and I was really interested in how it was going to get there. But I was really scared for everybody else in the cast.
Yeah.
Because I suddenly remember, I was like, wait, this is horror fiction, and I'm really attached to everyone now.
I think that the first book had kind of room to be lighter because they all had to get through that. So I focused quite a lot on just making the demons kind of foul mouthed, spitting out Shakespearean insults and whatnot, just to make them seem, I guess, more not engaging, but something that these children who are experiencing would be quite kind of shocked and stunned by, but they can still overcome them because they're a touch ridiculous in many ways. I think the first demon is one summoned by just a guy in a farm, so it's not something with massive power. So it builds up from there. But come the last book, some of the creatures in there are just ridiculously large and just some kind of maggot-like creature in the caves of Morocco. But it gets stranger and stranger in some ways.
Yeah, there was a real sense of like escalation in all senses as you go through the trilogy. So it really felt like it was building up to something big, which I think when you're dealing with real people from history, I do think it's quite hard to put a new slant on an inevitable ending, and I do think you did that so well. Actually, I was just remembering the demons where I was picturing now when I was reading them. I think what the humor in the first book, especially with the Shakespearean insults and stuff, is because we do see a lot of demons in horror fiction, but they're normally foul-mouthed in present day, using present day language or the language of whoever they've possessed or things like that. So it was quite funny to read horrible insults and vulgarity, but in a language that we all associate with being really like sort of high class, literary, you know. How much research? Sorry, I just need to shuffle. How much research time did you have going on?
I spent a long time before I even started writing it. It's a really good biography on Guy Fawkes, which I kind of used for various parts of it, and then it was kind of then diving into kind of other things further. It's really strange, like the story of the gunpowder plot, the way that happened, because it was delayed by several months because Parliament didn't open because there was a lockdown, and it's so weird that echo with our own time. Recently as well. Yeah, it probably would have succeeded if not for that, because that extra couple of months when Parliament was closed perhaps allowed for it to be discovered. So it was the day of the opening of Parliament, which wasn't until November, and normally Parliament would open in September. So it was held back because of a couple of months because of this. So kind of finding little things out like that during the research was kind of strange, but then that became a part of the story where you've got this period where everything's stalling. Doesn't do great for your pacing unless you can then add something else in there. So I had to then kind of add other elements while still maintaining the history. But there's these opportunities where, for instance, that Guy Fawkes really did go to Spain and fight the Spanish, but exactly what he did during that time is not known. So within those gaps, I felt I could bring in different things. So I send him to Morocco, but it's perfectly feasible that he would have gone there because Spain and Morocco were in conflict, and there was an alliance. There was the Anglo-Moroccan alliance. And that is where England was getting their gunpowder from, or their saltpeter from, to make gunpowder. So, and it just seems, looking back that far in history, that there were these alliances across continents and all of this stuff going on, and because of gunpowder being kind of a key kind of item and key thing within it, it's like, well, yeah, I can throw Guy Fawkes into that. So I both enjoyed the real history where there were things that were going on, but then the gaps also worked too. The nun, the kind of the ghost, the demon nun that they meet in one of the towns, that's based on a real legend as well. But
Really?
yeah, so a lot of the demon. When we talk about the research, kind of, I did probably as much research into beliefs in demons at the time as I did the real history.
Mm-hmm.
There's this absolutely nuts guy called Montague Summers, the Reverend Montague Summers, who in the 1940s was writing these books, Witchcraft and Black Magic. And he writes about them as if he truly believes all of these things are very real, that there is a cabal of werewolves running out of Oxford University, all of this stuff. And he is utterly in earnest. And he seems, and you can't believe that as recently as 1945, somebody who had a position like a reverend would still believe in actual physical demons. So his stuff is incredibly well researched. It's got dozens and dozens of references to grimoires from hundreds of years before. It's absolutely fascinating to think, well, the beliefs at the time in demons are actually real. King James wrote a book about demons, so that how they believed in. So this is slightly before the witch hunts really took off in England. So all of that belief in magic and demons is actually real. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that, because I know there's always been religion and superstition. Basically, as long as people have been around, there have been things to speculate on. I didn't realize that recently those kind of beliefs were so taken so seriously, though. You know.
I think he was a very troubled guy. By
Yeah.
looking into his life, he had some pretty unsavory kind of habits, and there's some question marks over various things why he left one branch of Christianity to go into another. So there's some strange stuff going on there with him, which I'm sure somebody will delve further into one day.
There's a lot to mine, though, from actual human history, I guess. That must have been so much fun for you, though, as you were forming this story in your mind, and then you're finding things like that. Like,
yeah, it's like, oh, I can throw that in there. I can put this in. Oh wow, this worked here. Can I work this into the story? Can I bring this place into it?
yeah, maybe that's why, because the world that you've created in this trilogy is so rich and deep and fun, that I think that's why it's so engaging, because you've got really like authentic characters, and obviously some of them are based on real people, but you've had to embellish what we didn't know, so you've got to have some fun with that. And then the journey that they're on itself is really interesting. But yeah, I think that you did excel with settings and like the smaller little things that are happening along the way, the details. It was really like, yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I kept stopping to Google things because I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I was like, did this happen? Did this? I did not realize that there was like belief in the demons and stuff. So I'm gonna have to go back now and have a look. I'm so interested.
Yeah.
So I know I never like to ask people like, how did you get the idea? But why did you go with? Was there a reason that you picked demons for Guy Fawkes? Because it could have been, it could have been vampires or werewolves.
Yeah, I think it was largely because of King James and the fact that he had written this book called Demonology, because he was somebody who believed in it deeply, and the things he did to people, the fact that he initiated all of those witch hunts that affected people so deeply, it was so ingrained in his belief, and then there was so much out there in terms of these people were writing about these creatures and they believed in this. I just thought it would kind of explain a lot of people's ill decisions in those eras if they were doing it for their own kind of nefarious purposes. If they then, because they can gain something from manipulating kind of the darkness, I kind of thought that worked to almost to reflect kind of the evil inside some people, and that we still see today, the fact they make these awful decisions that are completely self-serving, and it's been to fit with this kind of the way that the demons are presented.
Yeah, it's really this is what I mean about like the sort of analogies and the metaphors that are so they're so relevant with sort of how people feel in the UK at the moment today, and obviously it's history repeating itself as well, because people were not very happy in Guy Fawkes' time, obviously. But yeah, I think wherever you lean politically, I think that everyone can agree that money does corrupt, and the people that hoard the most wealth, like dragons sitting on eggs, are perhaps not the most morally sound people to be making decisions for people who have got to decide between food and turning their heating on, which is unfortunately quite a large number. It's quite a big percentage of the population are living like that right now. A much bigger population than the people who have a lot of money. So I thought demons were like the perfect way to go, sort of, but that's my sort of favorite genre of horror anyway. So it's perfect for me as a reader. It ticked all of my boxes. If I'd had a history teacher like you, Ben, I think I probably would be more well informed about British history, especially, and I'd be more interested. We learned about how the Native Americans hunted the buffalo in the Wild West. And part of my GCSE exam was listing the ways that they used the buffalo. And I even thought in that exam, why was this the key part of my GCSE history? Not that I'm not interested in American history, but it just seemed like such a specifically weird thing to hinge so much of my grade on.
Yeah, I did medicine through time, which had interesting elements. Germany between the wars. What else? Oh, there's another element of it as well. At the moment, they do castles in GCSE history. There's a whole element of castles. And yeah, it's strange. One of the history teachers I used to work with would always say that we have the better stories. With me being an English teacher, he would claim his stories were better, but I could put demons in them and they can't. So
yeah, exactly. I remember when I first got with my husband and we were talking about World War II, and I was like, I know nothing about World War II. He's like, well, do you remember what you learned in school? I was like, yeah, they didn't teach us World War II. And he was like, what do you mean? It's like one of the biggest historical worldwide events. I was like, yeah, I don't really rate the school I went to. I did have some great teachers there, don't get me wrong, but I know sometimes it's not it's the syllabus, isn't it, as dictated by people who aren't actually teachers. So I'm sure a lot of it wasn't actually the fault of the teaching. It was just what was on the syllabus. But I did have to. I've learned a lot of stuff through other people when they've gone, what do you mean you didn't learn about? And it's always history stuff. So am I mistaken? You were a history teacher, right?
I was an English teacher.
I assumed history.
Yeah. So I think that enabled me to embellish things a lot more. So yeah, it was English. Which again has its problems. The fact that the modern text that you teach is from 1944, so things like that don't quite add up.
Yeah, I loved my English teacher. He was quite a lot of people hated him, but I was on his good. It's probably because I was a reader, so he just automatically liked me, and he was nice to me. But I remember learning like most of our stuff was Shakespeare, and I'm not saying not to teach Shakespeare, but I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to get younger kids engaged in reading.
Yeah, it has to be the right ones at the right time. Yeah.
I personally like Shakespeare, but I was a theatre kid also, which is why I think I was a Shakespeare kid.
Yeah.
But I never heard anyone at the age of 14 going, do you know what I fancy reading? Oh, Macbeth. I think I'll just pick it up for leisure. Yeah, it was so let's branch out to some of your other works. Because I'm a fan of yours in general. I read several of your books, novels, and shorter stuff as well. And there's generally, I think everything I've read of yours so far has been supernatural in nature. So, do you have anything that isn't supernatural?
Perhaps my third novel, Normal. No, I think that's mostly, that's an odd one. So the first one, Dead Branches, leans a lot into kind of supernatural goings on, which may or may not be there depending upon how you look at it.
I really liked that one.
That was my first novel, and it was just so much fun to write, and again, kind of going back to 1990, which some people might call that historical fiction now, but those people,
no,
yeah,
1990 was only 2 years ago, Ben.
yeah. Then the second novel, Is She Dead in Your Dreams, is much more kind of supernatural. Normal was the third one, and maybe that's the least supernatural. That's about people who. It starts with a boy who is 15 years old and he wakes up by a riverbank and doesn't know where he's been for the last 7 years. No, 7 months. 7 months, not 7 years. But then you've got different perspectives, and I guess there's nothing kind of ghostly supernatural. There's something other and odd going on, but probably the least supernatural. And then I think some of the short stories don't necessarily. Oh, I did write a novella which is more kind of psychological horror. Ghosts of Time and Memory, which is available on my website for free, which is about a woman whose twin sister, a widow whose twin sister steals her husband.
Oh,
and that's supposed to make. Hang on, how's that work? But it kind of does. There's cosmic stuff going on. Yeah, that's probably the one that has kind of no supernatural element, though perhaps there's something in there. I can't help leaning into it a little bit.
For your sort of reading and viewing preferences with horror, do you prefer supernatural stuff?
I think I'd read quite widely within horror. I think the only genre I don't think I really kind of seek to read anything specific. It's kind of what are people rating at the moment? What are they talking about? And I kind of go for that. So whether it's kind of a creature horror or a supernatural horror or something kind of a bit kind of otherworldly, then yeah, I just kind of lean into it and go with it. I don't read a lot of extreme horror. That's probably the only one that I don't.
It's too much for me too. Yeah. I made the mistake of asking for Extreme Horror X, and I said I'm new. So I made the stupid assumption that people would go easy and give me the less extreme horror books, but no. Apparently, I was hit pretty hard with some that even extreme horror fans consider extreme, and so sickening. But there is an art to extreme horror. There's some I really liked and I saw a lot of merit in, and then some I did think was a bit shock value-y. But there is an art to it for sure that I don't have. So.
Yeah, I think if you are still telling a very good story within there and the extreme element embellishes that story, then yeah, it can be done really well. It's when the shock comes first and the story and the character after, I think that then has less value. I wouldn't enjoy reading that as much.
I think it's with any genre. It's the style over substance kind of problem, isn't it? Because you get it with every subgenre, I suppose. What was I going to just ask you about? Can you remember what your first horror love was, like film or book, or the thing that really got you interested?
We used to watch horror movies every Friday and Saturday night with my mum and my nan. When my dad and my granddad would go out, and we'd just sit and watch a horror film. So it started off with like the Hammer House of Horror. So like Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are real kind of horror icons for me. And in that day, you could get kind of Ladybird book versions of Dracula and the Hound of the Baskervilles. So some of my first reading of these little Ladybird books were versions of kind of the horror films that we'd been watching. So that was, yeah, the real kind of starting point. And all of the games that we played had kind of horror leanings. I was reading Scream comic, and I didn't realize how young I was until the 40th anniversary collection came out. And I think I was like 6 or 7 when that was out, and there were only about a dozen, 17 issues of it. But we used to get that from the newsagents every week, and it's got these horrible stories in about vampires and what. Yeah, we loved it.
Yeah, I think. Oh, it's hard to know what the first thing was. I just know that I've always liked horror stuff. Like even the Disney, I wasn't massively a Disney kid, and the ones that I did like were the ones that were a bit messed up, like Snow White, Alice in Wonderland, things that had darker themes. I guess I've always liked it, and Return to Oz was probably what really cemented it, because I didn't like The Wizard of Oz. I'm not really a musicals kind of person, I guess, and I wasn't as a kid. That's probably why I wasn't really a Disney kid. It's all the singing.
Yeah, I didn't see Return to Oz until my kids watched it, and yeah, that's messed up. That's
scary. Like that was like I think that had a universal rating, not even a PG rating. Yeah. And then when you watch it later and you see, it wasn't. Everyone always talks about the Wheelers, but it was the headless witch for me, with the cabinets of screaming decapitated heads. I was like, oh,
she has electric shock therapy, doesn't she? And there's storms going on, and it's like. Yeah. It's like, what's going on? This is Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, and you put electric through her brain. It's
Yeah, I didn't. I watched it last year for the first time in years, and I didn't. Yeah. It never even occurred to me how messed up just the opening is with the electric shock therapy. I was like, oh my god,
this is horrendous. It's horrific. It's just, awful.
But I guess it was like the darker fantasy films that really got me into horror, because I think that would still be considered a fantasy, but really that's a horror film to me. And even something like Labyrinth, there's scary stuff in there. You watch it totally differently as an adult. There's scary stuff. There's scary stuff that you didn't notice as a kid, like, I don't know, David Bowie's pants.
Yeah. I love Labyrinth. Yeah, I watch it again and again, but it's a very dark concept.
Well, Hoggle spraying the fairies is really funny to me now, because it's just like, I just thought, what maniac thought of that? That they're just like a pest in your garden. You can spray them. So in terms of what are you working on now?
I'm very early on another story set in the 1600s. I'm kind of stuck there now for a little bit, I think, but it's set in the Fens. So it's a story about fen drainage and resistance to that. I've only written kind of the first chapter, and that's probably not quite finished, but it starts with a young girl making kind of a pilgrimage to Ely Cathedral to pray to God for help to get rid of these people who have invaded her land and are trying to change it. But when that doesn't work, she has to look to darker influences to see them off.
Ooh, that's I'm excited.
Yeah, I got a bit stuck in research land for that, because I wanted to make sure that the landscape is right. So trying to capture what it was like pre-drainage, when during the winter months it's largely flooded, but then you've got whole communities that are living there with livestock and whatnot during the summer months, and how that changes. So I'm kind of trying to set it around November time, when it is in that kind of state of flux, it is changing, is getting kind of wetter, and the waters are rising, and then you've got these people who are trying to see that off. So there's plenty of conflict in there.
Would you say that you have like favorite or common themes that you like to work with?
I think I accidentally end up kind of coming back to the same things. The fact that I seem to have stumbled into a rebellion again in this one has come across. So I think, I think there are themes I end up coming back to, but just that resistance to corruption. I mean, the more I've looked into that, the worse it seems, in terms of just stealing a county's worth of land to just give it to the Earl of Bedford, when people lived here and made lives here, and then you take away their way of making a living. and it just seems like an act of theft on a grand scale. So I think that anger kind of with power has kind of become more of a theme over kind of the Guy Fawkes and the current work.
I as a reader, this isn't just in the Guy Fawkes books, but the other works of yours I've read as well. There's usually, I've picked up that your protagonists are usually coming from like a basis of like, I don't know, seeking fairness, justice, and also they're brave. You write a lot of really brave characters that are, they're scared, but they're, doing the thing anyway. Which I think, especially these days, they're inspiring protagonists because everyone is scared. It's just, is it just me, or is this just like a feeling in the air of just like everyone has got some sort of like existential like panic going on, or everyone's like, it feels like the world is suddenly really, I don't want to say evil, but like everything in the news is heinous, and
yeah,
you pair it with the cost of living in the UK is ridiculous now, and I keep hearing people say the phrase like that we're being priced out of life, and it does feel, every time I do the food shopping, things are a little bit more expensive, and every time I pay for it, I'm like, oh my god, like how gonna have to start selling the few remaining organs I have left on the black market to get my snacks.
Yeah, it does feel very much like that, and I think with like, both my first two novels, Dead Branches and Is She Dead in Your Dreams, the protagonists are people who perhaps haven't always had to be strong in the past. They've had somebody else who then either isn't there or isn't coping well with the situation. So Thomas Tilbrook in Dead Branches, he leans on his brother quite heavily, but then Will is kind of veering away from it. He doesn't want to investigate anymore. He's finding it all too much. So he has to keep going himself. And then in Is She Dead in Your Dreams, Orwell has very recently lost his wife. So he now is trying to bring up the daughter, Shelley. But he then has to try to be strong while they're kind of grieving at the same time. They're forced to move into this kind of remote Fenland cottage, which has some kind of grief monster living in it, which is feeding off. So then he has to be the strong one for that.
Yeah, it's they're relatable, and then relatable characters that I get really invested then, because it's like I guess a lot of the time this is a weird thing to say about the horror genre, but I experience sort of like a lot of wish fulfillment when I'm reading, because usually I don't know, people who don't read horror have this impression that everything is doom and gloom, but most horror stories do end somewhat triumphantly. Like there's usually a happy ending, or like a sad ending, but something really meaningful happened. So I think I think that maybe that's one of my favorite things about your writing and your characters, is that you sort of like live vicariously through people having crazy adventures.
Yeah, I've kind of spoken to a lot of people who like that kind of bleak ending in horror sometimes, and I don't think it's always for me. I do like some kind of hope in there. I think there's too little hope sometimes in life. So yeah, it's nice to have some somewhere, even in fantasy.
Yeah, I don't know. My fiction, my last collection, every story in it ended horribly, and that I intended it to be like that. That was kind of like the theme of the thing. And I really, I don't know. I felt quite demented writing it, because I'd finished the stories like.
I think I got to the end of the second one. I was like, that's why it's called The End.
Yeah, and so, but when I'm reading, I really respect a bleak ending, like when the author just goes, nah, that screw all of you, live in misery at the end of this book. But that's because they're not the norm. I think I respect it, enjoy it when it comes up, but I do normally need to read something light immediately afterwards, just so I don't feel depressed. But for some reason, I really like to do it, and I'm working on a novel right now, and I have two potential endings in mind, and I honestly don't know which one I'm going to go with. I have one that is considerably horrible, and I'm like, oh, I don't know whether to just do it. But I might be a bit much at the end of a novel as opposed to a short story.
Release both, but don't tell anyone there are two different endings out there.
Oh my god, that'd be so fun. Just seeing people go like, I love the ending, and then other people like, what's wrong with you?
That'd be amazing. Yeah.
It did. Obviously, we saw each other at FantasyCon that happened
Yes.
a couple of weeks ago, and I want everyone to know that we were robbed with the raffle. I feel very strongly about it. We always do the raffles together, and we usually win things. And we were separated this time.
And won nothing as a result. Yeah,
won nothing. So that's clearly some sort of magic.
Dark magic.
Yeah, I don't know why, but there was a lot of obviously bookish conversations and people talking about sort of like optimistic feeling horror as opposed to just really doom and gloom, horrible, bleak horror. I thought you struck a really good balance in the third Guy book, because obviously that's the one where I'm like, oh, this is where we're gonna lose Guy. It's gonna happen. But it didn't feel I did cry a little bit in that book, though. I tell you, and not just because of Guy. I was saddened several times, but not in a oh no, I need to go and binge watch The Inbetweeners kind of way.
Right.
Yeah, it was really nicely balanced with all of your other elements. So, if you were recommending your Guy Fawkes series to potential readers, how would you summarize it?
It's an alternative look at history, layered through demonology, buckets of blood, and fun and adventure.
Yeah, I would say that's perfect. And, yeah, sorry if I've talked too much during this. I'm just really enthusiastic about these books, so I'm excited to tell people about them. Do you have any bonfire night plans? What you doing?
I genuinely don't know. I'm not sure if I'm working or not. My schedule's all over the place. So normally we go to a local kind of a bonfire event with lots of fireworks. So there's bound to be one on one of the days around when I'm not working. So I think the 5th is midweek. I think it's a Tuesday. So there's probably going to be kind of the weekends either side. There's likely to be. So yeah, we'll definitely be checking out one somewhere. But yeah, not sure where yet.
Yeah, it's an odd holiday, isn't it? I think that people aren't from the UK. I always wonder what people who aren't from the UK think we're doing.
Yes.
Because everyone seems to recognise it as a national holiday, but as far as national holidays goes, it's not made as big a thing of as, Christmas or anything, obviously, or even Valentine's Day. Probably ranks behind that for some reason as well. So.
Yeah. People aren't yet giving out cards for it.
Yeah. Happy
guys.
Happy assassination attempt day. So dark. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I'll cut it out. Yeah, I used to love. We always used to have candy floss for some reason.
Yeah.
Candy floss and toffee apples. So.
Oh, toffee apples. Yeah. Easy to break your teeth on.
I was gonna say I stopped eating them now.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I have kept you long enough. I would just once again love to just recommend this whole series to everyone. I think that if you're any sort of horror fan, I think there's definitely a lot to like in there, kind of across the board, and especially if you have a history. What's the word I'm looking for? Interest in history. And it's just fun. It's just like a good fun time caper with a lot of heinous violence.
Yeah.
Flying body parts. And also the rest of Ben's work as well. I'm going to obviously link the series and Ben's website and the links to a bunch of my favourite books from you as well, outside of the Guy Fawkes series. So yeah, and if anyone has any questions for Ben or anything about anything we've discussed or the series, please let us know. Let me know. I can pass them along, or you can stalk Ben on social media yourself. I'll put your social media links in the description as well, Ben, so that people can track you down and mine you for Guy Fawkes information.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to promote outside of Guy Fawkes while we're here before we sign off?
I have just today opened up my Etsy shop for my lino prints.
Yay!
So yeah, as of today, they can now be found. I've only popped a couple of things on there so far, including this Count Von Count on a page from Dracula.
Oh, nice.
That's but yeah, and I've got to pop this one online soon. My Pennywise.
That's
So this and others are going live. I think I intended to do it for last Christmas, but now here we are, end of October, and it's only just gone online.
Yeah, you've been working on those for a while, haven't you? Because I've seen you posting over the last year when you've been...
Yeah, they're nice when you need a change of pace. So, and you can just sit and kind of pick away at those with a bit of lino and a blade and just pick away at those for several hours, and it's very relaxing. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely link your Etsy store in the description as well. That's a perfect for me coming up to Christmas, and we're just out of spooky season and general great house decor. You never get good horror decor, do you? It's hard to find.
I've got a few things behind me that are quite interesting. So we've got hang on, I did this the wrong way. These newspaper ones are great. They're like newspaper articles.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I picked those up from HorrorCon this year. And on that side, I've got I'll write directly into a light there. Yeah, various bits and pieces. So yeah, HorrorCon is always great for picking up things. I'm running out of wall space now.
Yeah, that's I pretty much run out of wall space. I've taken a bunch of stuff down to reassess so we can make room for new things. But yeah, HorrorCon is where I get all of my home decoration and cool jackets.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you so much for giving me this hour, Ben. It's been I was really excited to do this one and talk about this series and everything. I really appreciate you being here, and we'll sign off for everyone now with our general goatee sign off of bleat. So thanks for being here, everybody, and bleat.